Hello and welcome to the Scenic Route with me, Victoria Stewart, where we talk about the road less traveled, or at least less traveled based off of what we were imagining, when we were younger or when we were planning our careers or whatever the case may be for you. And how, when something happens in our lives, this takes us off this trajectory that we thought we were on. A lot of times it's better than we ever could have imagined. So I am very excited to have Justin Anderson, who writes under the pen name J. Valorin, to be here today to talk about his story. And, well, he writes fantasy, which is my favorite thing there ever was. So I'm very excited to hear all about Justin's adventures. So, Justin, would you like to introduce yourself a little better?
Well, thank you for having me, Victoria. Yes, my name is Justin Anderson, right under the name J. Valorin, and I write fantasy, but I also have started, well, I won't say really have started, I built a transmedia dark fantasy universe. Within the universe, of course, there's a novel that's a work in progress, folklore that touches on different invisible weights that groups carry. There's just so much there for people who need it, from a memorial wall to a place to kind of let go of negativity. And even currently in progress, I'm working on a community piece that allows people to kind of ease their way into therapy if they need it, as opposed to just jumping right in. So I've been working on that piece with licensed therapists to make sure that it's official. It's not just kind of a self-help guru type thing where you throw it out, but it's something that is being looked over and vetted to say, yes, this is the right way that you can lead a person to, get help or to not re-traumatize themselves while they're trying to work on their mental health.
Yeah, that is amazing, right? Because it's one thing to have this idea for yourself, but to be adding kind of that due diligence underneath, that is pretty amazing. Sorry, the dog is being noisy in the background.
It's okay. And yes, I agree. I think that's one thing that gets missed a lot is it's really easy to say, well, you do this or you do that and it'll work for you because it worked for me or it worked for a friend. But, everyone has different personality types and everyone has different lives, and what works for you may not work for me. And now, because you're telling me that this works for hundreds or thousands, now I'm feeling even more alone and more mentally vulnerable because it's like, well, out of all these thousands and thousands of people, why does nothing work for me? So I think the importance within the mental health field and, not only trying to erase the stigma around it, but if you're going to build anything that touches it and that is self-help in a way, then you should be doing that due diligence to have it vetted in order to make sure that it's not going to be harmful to vulnerable societies.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense, right? The idea that we can cause more harm than good sometimes, even with the best of intentions, unfortunately. So I am curious, when you were, I don't know, a young man, what were you imagining your life was going to be like that maybe didn't include this? Or maybe you did. I'm just curious. Like, what did you see your trajectory or your highway?
I feel like amongst males, it's really common to have that dream of you're going to be some kind of sports star. Not really sure. I think that's get pushed a lot. So that's probably why. So, I started off with, I'm going to be an NBA player or a football player. And I quickly learned that wasn't for me. In fact, I'm probably a odd male amongst most. I do not like sports or watching sports for the most part. Like, I always wanted to play them. I enjoyed playing, although I didn't enjoy playing like on a football team, like for school, because I didn't like the rules and I had to wear helmets and pads. I just wanted to play, is how I kind of felt. But as far as watching it, I just always felt like if I'm going to sit here and watch sports, I'd rather just be playing them. So it's really interesting normally because I have a lot of males that will speak to me and they'll be like, "Oh, you see that game?" And I'm kind of like, "Nope, I don't even know who you're talking about." And it could be just a really popular player, basketball player, football player. And I'm like, "Nope, have no clue." But after that, I kind of went through a few things. One of the things that I heavily thought I wanted to be, or I did want to be, was a psychologist. I always had an interest in mental health, in the way that the mind works. And what actually ended up deterring me from that was I am not good with math, um, or at least algebra. I can do geometry. I'm very, very bad with the, um, how do I want to say it? Like the non-concrete concepts around algebra. It was really hard for me to grasp that, a number now can represent a letter and all that type of stuff. And I just couldn't do it. And it took a lot of math to become a psychologist. And I was like, well, if I went into psychology, I would probably spend about 5 years because I would have to take a single math class per semester because I'm not going to pass algebra if I take it with anything else. And yeah, that doesn't sound very fun. So that's really what took psychology off the table for me. I kind of weighed the options, not only, when I got through the points of um, looking at whether I would do psychology or computers or culinary. I looked at the finances and the job opportunities, but I also looked at, well, what would honestly be feasible for me to do class wise, knowing myself, because I thought I wanted to be a psychologist uh, pretty much most of my life. So that was like the prominent thing. I did think I wanted to be a writer also at one point, but I'm also really bad with grammar. I can write really, really good, but grammar was not my strong point. My sister normally had to edit my papers, and then she will fuss at me because she'd be like, "How do you have this many grammatical mistakes?" I was like, "I don't know." I was like, "It all just..."
I don't see them.
Exactly. She's like, you have words that are not like there. And I'm like, I realize the interesting thing, and I realize we kind of jumped around, but one thing that I do realize as far as the writing thing, when I was writing, my mind would be coming up with ideas so fast that I would honestly miss words. And it was weird because me and my sister would debate it, and I would have to read it out loud or with my finger under it, because if I read it just to myself, I would automatically insert those words.
Yeah.
So I'm like, "What do you mean the words are missing?" She's like, "Right there." And I'm like, oh, okay.
You're right. It's not there.
Exactly. And it was very fun for me to write, but I hated okay, you got to do the grammar, the punctuation. And normally in school, I would normally average around a C plus, because my writing, my teachers would find captivating, but my grammar was so bad that it would pull down my grade. And it sounds weird because of how fast technology has progressed, but back then, Word would correct you had to have it close enough for Word to correct it, but it pretty much only corrected it misspellings.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
if you couldn't do the grammar portion yourself, then basically you have to find someone to do. So I was like, well, I guess writing's off the table. So I kind of like started eliminating stuff by just what I felt I could do. And I thought I wanted to do culinary for a little while, and I looked at the market and realized culinary from a financial standpoint, it has very little return unless you can create your own business or get, a part of a 5-star restaurant or something around that nature. And ironically, I don't really like limelight. So I never pictured myself creating my own business as I am now.
And being on a podcast.
Exactly.
And many podcasts.
So I've definitely changed from then, and that left, computers, that was a, great middle ground. It paid well, didn't need a lot of math unless I was doing like the software side of it, which again, I didn't expect to do that. But so my life has really taken a lot of turns from where I originally thought it would go. And it's been a fun journey in some capacity. And you asking me about it, I never really thought about it until you just asked me that question. So it's kind of interesting as I think about it live.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of almost seems like you're almost coming around full circle. You're coming back to the original kind of ideas that you were working with, the psychology, psychiatry, the writing. It's all coming back there. Even without the degree and, that piece of it, but the mental health piece, the mind, the writing, it's all coming back together, which is pretty neat.
It is. That's actually true. And I thought about it at one point. I was like, well, in order to do, psychology, I can still learn things and invest in understanding the mind, even though I didn't go to school for it. And I will say, versus book knowledge, I've understood more from interactions and observing than just reading about it. And a lot of that I would contribute to my mother. She spent, 30 plus years working as a case manager for a mental health company. And just kind of listening to her speak about interactions, she may have had with people, or even if I was just happened to be at a store and she was there with a client, just watching how people would interact or view them really shaped and impacted the way that I decided I wanted to be. A lot of people would judge, and especially in the 90s and prior, when we talked about mental illness, it had this it still has a stigma and negative connotation, but it was so much worse back then. Basically, mental illness meant straitjacket and drooling almost, it felt like. So, and that's really where the context of the writing came to be, is that I wanted to represent mental health in a more accurate way versus what you see in society as in the movies and books and video games. Very few represent mental illness in a accurate way. The character is always very, they're either like the killer or almost completely unable to function. And it's like, that's not true. And that's harmful for, number one, for people who have mental illnesses, but also for people who are discovering that they're having. The thought that you may become like what the media shows you would prevent a lot of people from being willing to even go get diagnosed, because it's like seeing your future self in your mind. It's like, well, if I get diagnosed, I'm going to become like this and I'm not going to be able to do anything. So I just rather not know.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes the nuance away from it, right? Like it becomes very like, oh, this is me, not, well, this is a part of me, or this is something that is good to know because now I can learn how to deal with it in a constructive way, or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
Very correct.
So curious how then you're living your life, you've gone to school, you're a network engineer. How, like, was there an inciting incident that you're like, I need to start writing again, I need to do something differently? Or was it kind of a gradual thing that started to shift things for you?
It was really just the way that the economy went, led to me feeling like, okay, well, I've always been good at writing. Even though it wasn't something I studied, I just, from my opinion, I've always been good at writing. I've been praised for my writing in a lot of cases. So I felt like, okay, well, all the stories I pretty much see follow a similar pattern. During that time, it was in the fantasy world, it was a whole system boom where it's like they get a magic system or a book or some kind of power, and then they become super powerful, and nobody can touch them. I was like, oh, I could write that beat. That's basically what happened in my mind, and I was like, so might as well do it and make a little bit of side income, and that's really what started it. And I sat down and I started writing, and it really took a different turn for me. I realized that, due to stereotypes, stigmas, the way that I was raised during the time I was raised, and the view of mental health during that time, I suppressed a lot of grief from when my grandmother, she had cancer when I was in 10th grade. So I suppressed a lot of grief, and that was over the course span of roughly 16 years. I didn't even realize that I suppressed it, really. I thought I dealt with it because the way that I've always heard you deal with it, it just goes away, kind of. It's the way that they talk about it. So I really ended up suppressing it. I went from being super angry, which is very common amongst the way that males deal with it, to just kind of like not feeling it anymore. And I was like, well, I'm done. I've gotten over it. And as I started writing, I started finding myself externalizing those emotions that I suppressed. And that led to other trauma from like childhood when I was growing up. Growing up in an area where there was roughly about 3 Black people and dealing with a lot of racism and being ostracized and things of that nature. It started bringing all that up, and that started combining itself within my writing. And I noticed the characters started changing. They weren't, lighthearted. They weren't written in a way that would lend itself to that kind of journey of, the system and all that. It really started to have weight, and it changed the trajectory of my story. So it was an unexpected turn from where the story went. The path was, just simply side income. And then the trajectory shifted towards really, really focusing on mental health in a true and honest way within writing, and, not slipping into, well, this character has, bipolar disorder. So they're just, snapping back and forth all the time. All of a sudden, one moment they're like, okay. And the next moment they're like choking someone out of a window or something. And that's really where the story started to build and kind of take shape.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so now, when you noticed this happening, right, like this nuanced approach to your characters growing and becoming more fleshed out, having, it wasn't like, oh, they have this, so they're like this all the time. It's like the weaving in and out of everything. How did that become then a universe? Or whichever language you use to describe your world.
Yes. So as the characters started to develop, again, as I said before, I spent years, 20 plus years writing, different things. And I've always enjoyed it. I enjoyed it enough to where, I remember in 6th grade that my teacher for Halloween, he wanted us to do a simple, basically a childlike, version of a Halloween story. And while I can write a lot of things, I don't, for whatever reason, and I think because I can't put a lot of depth behind the characters, I feel like, in a child book and children books. So I don't really care for writing children's story. And I didn't want to write that. And me and my teacher, we had a back and forth, and we came up with a bet. I made him a bet. I was like, I bet you I could write you a horror story that isn't just blood and guts and killing, like most teenagers would do, and that you would be willing to read it. And we went back and forth, and he accepted it. And I don't remember why it came up with the random name. I think it was just the first thing that came in my mind. I remember naming it Honey Juno, and I have no clue why. And I even remember the original concept was similar to that movie with Denzel Washington. I can't remember the name of it right now, but where that like the devil would take people's body, and in order to kill that devil, he had to be outside of the body for so long. And it was originally, I was like, oh yeah, that's a cool idea. I can write around that. And then I think either the writer in me was like, no, you're basically copying. So I completely just did away with that. And the story became very philosophical, where it was around the context of religion and the words that are said versus not said in perception. And the whole context was there was this teenager that attended this church, and the church would call the Bible the holy book of him. And throughout it, there was traces of things. They never really used the word God. They used him. They never said Jesus and things. And throughout it, you discover that people attending this church are being fooled because they're thinking they're worshiping God, and they're worshiping the devil because the small language differences, and it goes to the perception. You're perceiving him to be God because that's what you believe, although you're just kind of following what someone else is saying. So you're not really understanding that. And I did a lot of work. I had my sister clean up the grammar, and had classmates reading pages as I was literally printing them off the printer in the raw form. And he gave me a D-.
What?
And he told me, and I was so mad. And I remember asking him, and he told me, he was like, there's no way a 6th grader could have written this. He was like, I don't know where you got it from, and I could not find where you gotten it from, but I'm certain that you must have plagiarized this, because there's no way that you could have written this. And I was so angry at first. And then all of a sudden I thought about it. I was like, I'm gonna wear this D- with pride, because for you to think that I plagiarized some kind of movie script that you couldn't find, then that means that I basically did what I said I was going to do. And it was kind of a shaping moment in understanding, writing for me. But it also still has, because of not fitting in from childhood, I never really realized that also stacked on a trauma side as well. So fast forward, what really got me building the transmedia universe was I joined a writing group thinking I would find like-minded people and people I could write with, because I've always kind of felt separated. So joining a group, and I didn't know the writing terms because I just would write. And I didn't know what a plotter was or a planner. I could figure it out by context clues. And they were trying to figure out what I was. And they were like, are you a plotter or a planner? Do you plan out everything? And I was like, oh no. I was like, I just write off the top of my head. I don't, I was like, well, writing off the top of my head, while that's true, I don't feel like that really explains what I do. So then they were like, oh, you're a pantser. So I'm like, okay, what's that? And they're like, you don't outline, you just kind of write. And I was like, well, that's closer, but I still don't feel like that hits the mark. A pantser kind of has I would say like a light tower or North Star in the distance that they know that they're going towards. They just don't know the path between there. And at the time, I really couldn't describe what I was. And now I liken it to method acting, where you've seen actors who would immerse themselves in a role to the point where if it dealt with them being kind of like a woodsman, they would go live out in the woods like the character for X number of months to really embody that role. When I write, I embody the character, I feel, and I'm more observing what their life is doing and then coming back as a author and writing that on the page. I don't really know what my characters are going to do between there and there, or where the trajectory particularly is. And that led to a really bad experience where they couldn't really figure out where I was and how I worked. And they were just kind of like, well, it seems like you don't really know anything about writing. And while I read some books, I found it really difficult to read a lot of just Western novels. I find anime and manga more appealing because of the subject matter, and there's different perceptions on life and death and how things are handled. Uh, and they were like, as a writer, as an author or a reader, I would never read your work. And it was just really toxic and horrible. It was like dogpilish, like not just one or two, but we're talking like 10, people just like bashing me because I don't write or follow the same pattern as them. And that was a very defining moment for me, because that is what really what really triggered me to realize I have childhood trauma and I have never dealt with this. And that, again, being the outcast is what really triggered that. It led me to going back to therapy. And then it also led me to really feeling alone. And I was like, I feel alone. And this is the same feeling I had when my grandmother was dying. Not necessarily because my mom and sister wasn't going through it, but as a male, I didn't know how to relay those emotions and that grief. And I thought I wasn't supposed to be emotional. So I was closing off. So I felt alone because of all the stereotypes. And that basically brought me to building a world that I wished I had back then, in a world that, for the people who feel alone, who feel outcast, but who have really heavy weight, that's invisible. It's not like they're, homeless or disfigured or whatever, but they're carrying this invisible weight that if you look at them, you're like, they're just a normal person, but they're really carrying something, and they need somewhere to witness it, not necessarily fix it, but just to witness it and say, I see you. And that led to me the building VaelorinVerse from that.
Yeah. I find that so curious, and I guess I don't know why I find it curious, just because it's a creative community. Like, we humans, we certainly love to gatekeep for some strange reason, right? And it's like, oh, well, you write differently, so you are wrong. It's like, since when? Since when?
I agree.
It's just so curious. But like, it's because of all these experiences, you're also like building this place where people who have felt like they're always the outsider and not had a place to call their own, like, and am I interpreting this correctly? Like,
Yes,
that's what you're aiming to be building, is like a place where all of this can get integrated and be seen, and
correct.
they can see themselves in
Yes.
this place.
And you don't realize until you really start looking how many people feel this way across the board.
Yeah.
And again, you are correct that it took me a little while to really kind of learn more about the writing community, and I have a lot of opinions. In all honesty, that could be a whole different podcast on it. But I will say, in short, I do feel like it's something overall that has been built towards over decades in, the way that the writing world and even the publishing world is, because they expect more of safety. So if you're too experimental, they don't publish. Or anytime you're queried, send a query letter in to try to find an agent, normally they want comp titles. So what is this book like? And, oh, well, it's like, and that's why if you ever pay attention, you notice they'll be like, well, my story is like Lord of the Rings meets,
Yeah.
Addams Family or something. And that's an expected thing when you're looking for an agent. But if your story always having to be compared to others, then how much can you really write outside of that box? Because you need to basically fit into this pattern in order to be published. And so this leads to that kind of that same pattern over and over, in my opinion. And again, that could be expanded on a whole lot. But
Yeah.
as you were saying, this led to me building this world, because as I started really noticing at that point, you got, first responders like firefighters, paramedics, who, and nurses, pretty much the medical field in general, who in their field, showing cracks in your armor for mental health can get you sidelined, could get you fired, could get you, in trouble. And so they don't do it. And a lot of them cope with dark humor, or in amongst firefighters. I know this statistics, and I, know a few others, but this is the one that I've kind of been podcasting with different firefighters. For males, alcoholism is very rampant in the firefighter community because it's coping. While for females, they have a higher rate of PTSD, and you deal with things in, the way that you can figure out, I can't talk about this. So, I drink, and then, this carries its own stigma, because now when people view you as a drunk, as worthless, well, I'm not drinking because necessarily I'm an addict. I'm drinking because this numbs this pain.
Mhm.
And you see this amongst, other occupations as I started looking, or caregivers,
Yeah.
they're taking care of a loved one, and they're trying to process the concept of losing someone slowly in front of them. And this is, something that I find very interesting, because there's not really a support network for losing someone who's still alive. And when, they're, and people don't really pay attention, like if you came and you tell them that someone's, dying from some kind of illness, you pretty much may get, I'm sorry, but it moves on, because there's no funeral, there's no flowers, there's no headstone or announcement of this death, where people know how to interact. And they just like, well, they're still living. So, life goes on. So you're kind of dealing with this alone for that reason. But, as someone who is watching this person, slowly change from what they were, you're honestly dealing with multiple deaths of that person, because you always have a view of what this person may be and what the life is going to be like in the future. I imagine my grandmother would have been alive to see my kids, hold her great grandkids and things, and be the woman I knew she was growing up, this vibrant, feisty woman. And for her to get cancer, and I watched that be stripped away to a shell of what she was. I'm now trying to cope with losing the versions of her that I imagine. These versions are now dying because I realize she will never be this person. Even if she does make it there, she will never be this version of herself. So you're going through deaths in multiple times, because the versions you were picturing are dying off, and then you do lose this person, and it's like, now you're going through this. But that actual process of losing that person where there's a burial is really the only time you get people who come to you and they're attending the funeral and hugs and let me buy you food and make life easier on you. But you could have been going through this for like 10 years and you did this all alone. And there's so many different occupations, so many different situations that are like this. And that's where I started really targeting different folklore for these situations and people who need it. Even as a businesswoman, it's very lonely being the one in charge, because all these decisions fall on you. And, the people under you, while they're mad and they're judging certain things, they don't understand that you also have a life. You may be taking care of a husband, losing a mother, child sick, but they're mad because of how you are affecting them. And you feel as if I'm not allowed to allow my emotions to interfere with my work because it affects other people. So now you're suppressing your emotions. So there's so many situations that, are affected by this suppression of emotions, or as I would say, invisible weight, of course, veterans and things. And, they're a really, really high one. So I wanted to let them know that they're seen. I'm not saying that I know what it's like, or I am a veteran or first responder, but I'm a witness to your pain, to your invisible weight that you're carrying. And even if there's nowhere else for you to go, you can come here and find things that reflect those emotions that you're feeling internally, externally, where others can understand it.
Amazing. So, one quick question, so that I understand. What does transmedia mean to you? Is that it's in multiple types of media that you're aiming to have this living in?
Correct. There's multiple ways to, work with it. You can read it, it will be in novel form. It will be in audio form. There's videos, when I build the folklore, it's an immersive website experience. So normally there's some kind of experience that you can feel for Tears of a Caretaker, which focuses on caretakers and people who had family members or loved ones with Alzheimer's or dementia. And there's a feature in there at the end of it that you can bind, words to. So you can see other people's memories of this person. They may tell you, I remember the day that they proposed to me. I remember the first time that we kissed, and you can bind a memory to it. So when I build, I try to make sure it's not just like you're reading an article, but you're being pulled into, for a lack of better terms, like a family, like its own universe where you don't feel alone.
Okay, amazing. And then how are you envisioning people coming in and interacting with this transmedia universe?
That's where the reason why it became one, in all honesty, was I wanted to make it accessible, as widely accessible as possible. And it started off with just a novel. And it was like, well, again, there may be people who don't fancy reading a book or don't have the time to read a book. So it's like, well, I would also make the novel an audiobook. And so that allows people to listen. And then I was like, well, for some people, fantasy world may not really be what they like. So then it became, I released a folklore. And while it lives within the fantasy world, it's shorter, but it's more concrete. And I have a pretty good balance, because my mother is very like poetic and metaphor. So she can understand when I get like really, or as they would say in the writing world, like purple prose, like really wordy. But my sister is really concrete. And if I do a real in-depth metaphors and whole bunch of colorful words, she's like, yeah, you're missing me now. So I normally would have both of them read it and try to find this middle ground where you understand it if you are a person who likes more concrete, just straightforward. And also if you like just the language, the rhymes or the pacing. So that led to the folklore, and it was like a shorter, more, okay, you're coming in with this specific wound or trauma that you're hoping to find something to witness. So that added that layer. And that allowed me to kind of be able to post those on like social media.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, it became, okay, well, I want something that, can help people who are kind of needing to manage their mental health, but they don't particularly like therapists for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Common reasons I've came across is they don't like that it feels so clinical. And that led to building another portion that allowed for people to come in to it's not therapy, I don't want people to misjudge it, but it's the roots of it is to basically help you work towards that if that's what you choose, or at least to help you work within yourself in a safe manner that isn't just marketing. And that led to another piece. And then I thought about how I process things. And when my grandmother, passed, I felt I wanted something physical to be able to look at, to hold. And I ended up with getting 2 tattoos. So then that led to me building a physical layer of like items, where it takes pieces of my world and, the symbolism, and there's items that you can buy where that has quotes from my world or quotes, like one of the quotes I have for like firefighters is, where the line, where the flame stops. And it has a firefighter, with a thread across it, because the thread is like basically is central to my world. And it's showing, without being overly positive, that toxic positivity or that dark humor, that this job has weight. They are where this fire stops. If a firefighter doesn't show up to fight this fire, it continues. And, for some people, it's like, well, I lost my home or I lost XY. But if they didn't even step in, not only you, but your neighbor, your whole block could have burnt down. That whole neighborhood could have burnt down. They are where it stops. And that job is hard because even they understand that. And that means that whatever loss you incurred, for some of them, if it's just property, they may feel okay with that. But if you lost a child or a loved one, they feel that weight too. Because they're thinking, not only did I let this person, die, but look at the pain that I caused this mother, this wife, this husband, this grandparent. And that guilt leads to a lot of, a high rate of suicide, a high rate of alcoholism and PTSD within those communities. So I started building, right now, as you see, it's like 4 different pathways into the same house, because I wanted to allow people to choose their path. And I understood that what one door may not be the same door that everyone walks through.
Yeah. No, that is so true, right? Because like for me, I love to read books, like fiction books, but I have to listen to nonfiction and then podcasts, right? But it's like everybody has their different entry points, which is like the wisdom you have to like offer it from these different directions is just amazing. Like as you're building, you're adding these different layers, which it's pretty inspiring. That you're like keeping this so much open-mindedness, especially with kind of, it sounds like your experience has been a lot of closed-mindedness around you, that maybe this is why, that then you're like, no, there's so many ways. There is no right way. Kind of like my dream for this podcast is to show that there's no right way to live your life, except for your way is the right way, not anybody else's.
Exactly.
So this is like, okay, your access is right, whichever it is that resonates with you.
Exactly. And I feel like it's important because people, social media, and just, I'll say media in general, give you such a unrealistic view in a lot of cases. As in your podcast, you talk about how, some people will want to take a pivot in life and they feel like they have to just go all in and forget everything else. There's no balance of, okay, well, can I do this and this? It's just like, well, I have to quit my job completely and then try to be a TikToker. It's like, well, no, that's not true necessarily. And the other portion that I think is important, because I remember going through this with my oldest, we had so many discussions because, TikTokers, it looks fun. You can play video games all day. You get millions of dollars. But I'm like, do you know how many hours these people put in? I was like, in all honesty, for some of them, they're spending more hours than what I do just working my regular job. And
yeah,
you just are looking at the end result, but you're not looking at what's all behind it that builds that end result, along with like back during the 90s and early 2000s, how like the music industry, it would almost be hidden, where it's like all these artists, yes, they're looking like millionaires. They got jewelries, nice cars, but then you find out that, well, yeah, a lot of these jewelry and clothing companies will give them free stuff because it's free marketing. This artist wears it, he's the biggest at the time, or she's the biggest, and other people are going to buy it for that reason. But then you find out when you hear about their record deal later on in life that they were getting like McDonald wages or something.
Yeah.
It's
yeah, it's wild, right? You're like, exactly. How is this even possible?
And people mistake it. And so I find it also important, as within your podcast that you talk about, you can do multiple things. It's a lot harder, but a lot of these things are built slowly. So, as you build and you split your time, because I still have my day job as a network engineer, and, my job to have people, understand it's not, because they feel like networking to them, but just sitting behind a computer. But the expectation for companies is that we have an uptime of 99.999. So 5 nines. And that basically means that anytime you go to a site or you go to order something off of something and the site basically says, oh, we're down, that expectation of downtime, no matter what, that includes us upgrading, fixing, improving, everything across the board should be basically less than like 5 hours a year. And so there's a high level expectation of keeping things running. But with that, I'm still building, a transmedia universe for others alongside of raising, I got an 18-year-old and then I got a 6-year-old and I got twins on the way. So
busy.
Yes. But what I did realize during this process is that I was even trying to move quicker than I needed. I was building pieces of like, okay, well, I need to, have this piece in place. I need to have this piece in place. And I didn't really have the traction for it, but I felt like it needed to be there ahead of time. And it led to me wasting money. Luckily, it wasn't buku amounts of money, but then, subscriptions add up. You pay for a $50 subscription to, host something. And it's like, well, I don't even have enough material to really need that consistently. So why am I paying for it for a year? So, these little things become sometimes time sinks within your journey of building. And you also will spend a lot of time thinking, I'm building and nothing's happening, because it takes time to build this audience, unless you're going to do a lot of money behind it to do ads and things, which still you need some kind of understanding of your audience and the audience to even do ads, because then you're just basically throwing a flyer out the window and it just lands on whoever happened to be walking by, and they may have nothing to do with what you're building. So, the concept of, well, just go all in, and, those videos you see where I quit my job and I'm so glad I quit my job to become this TikToker. It's like, yeah, don't believe the hype. A lot of them, they didn't do that. You can manage both, and it takes time to build. So, don't be in a rush, or at least let me rephrase, it takes time to build correctly. You can build something really quick, and then that's where you see a lot of people, they jump into fame and they get their 5 minutes, and then they don't have any way to manage that money to grow that income. And then they're back to where they started or worse, because it happened so quickly.
Yeah. Takes time to build it sustainably, to make sure you're building what you actually want, and so that you can maintain it long term, if that's your goal. Some people
Correct.
like to build lots of little things, right? And just, you never know, right? We're all different, so everybody can build their own thing. So to close, as we wrap up, is there anything you wish I had asked or that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get a chance to cover?
Well, yeah, one piece that I do feel like important, and I try to make sure I mention it on every podcast, is, you know, a couple concepts around therapy, because I know therapy is a hot topic, and coming off of May, all the companies do, we're so care about your mental health, and it becomes almost like noise. So I always try to touch on a few things just because I find it important. So number one, I always try to touch on, therapy is like, picking your favorite food or picking a place to eat. It's not a one size fit all. And it's okay to go to therapy and find out you don't really vibe with that therapist for whatever reason. You don't connect with them. Maybe they're too pushy. Maybe they're not pushy enough. Maybe you don't feel like they understand. And that's important to understand that, saying to this therapist that I don't feel like we're a good match is even offensive to most of them, at least a good therapist, I would say, because they understand that it may not work. Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons why it may not work. And one of the reasons I try to explain in a simplistic way, because I didn't know this, is that there's multiple types of therapy. And I'm not talking about like where you have some therapists that have you touch things versus talk, or, the ink block where people think it may be like that. But there's different frameworks that work a certain way. Some are more confrontational, and it's like you face the problem. Here are counter steps to counter that problem when it comes up, and you do this almost combative. And for people who are very direct and in a way that may work better, for people who are more creative like me, narrative therapy may be better, where you're authoring your story, you're kind of rewriting your story and understanding it in a creative manner. Or art therapy. There's, internal family systems, where you're dealing with the way that it's structured is like you're dealing with inner voices and things, and you're dealing with that in a internal way. So there's so many different types, and that may involve some learning on reading a few of them. There's CBT, there's ACT, IFS, narrative therapy, continuous bonds, and you may have to read a few of them to see, okay, does this feel like the way that I process, to know a starting point? Because for me, my first therapist was a cognitive behavioral therapist. And that's the one where it's like, okay, I know I catastrophize, which basically I look everything that I mentally think about, I go to the worst. And then here are counter ways to think about this when you start doing this. And that didn't fit me. It's just not the way I process. But I stumbled across narrative therapy, and that aligns more with the way that I create things in this creative story manner, in externalizing my thoughts, which brings me to the second point. A lot of therapy, and I kind of thought about this as I was going through grief. I call it like the two doors of grief. There's a I door, which most therapy focuses on the context of I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm unhappy, and not everybody is at a point where they can talk about or talk about themselves in a internal way, or process things internally. I don't do well with that. And then I found by accident, and this is where, like, the story kind of circles around, that you can also externalize your emotions. And that's where we do it naturally and don't think about it. But that's where the whole context of, I know someone, I have a friend that did this. It's not me, but a friend. You're distancing yourself from the problem and you're externalizing it when you basically are saying that it's somebody else or something else and not you, but you're trying to find a solution to the problem that's really internal to you. And that's the door. And I say the E door because in grief, there's, an I and an E that I stumbled through and found that worked really well for me was externalizing it through writing, through my folklore, through, having it voiced or listening to it. It made it worked for me. Now, that doesn't mean that, everybody is going to work for everybody. Some people are ready to start with, I'm sad, or they may do better with that. But sometimes it may take you externalizing, distancing yourself from it. And then later on, you can come like I am now and be like, I was grieving when my grandmother was doing this. I was this way. I was vulnerable. And I feel like those are important things for people, to understand. And the very last part of therapy that I think is really important for people to get is, why they may be resistant to therapy in some way. And a couple analogies that I think may help understand is, number one, therapy is like learning a new language. You go in and you're like, I'm sad, I'm mad. Sometimes I'll be really mad and I'm really sad and then I'm mad again, or I'm this emotion, that emotion. And you go to a therapist and then you come out and you have words that now have stigma and stereotype attached to it. You went in sad, now you come out with seasonal depression. You went in because you were angry and now you have some kind of anger diagnosis or bipolar disorder. And when talking to someone and telling them I'm sad or I'm mad, you get typical response. Well, why are you mad? Calm down, it'll be all right. Or, oh, you need a hug. Or Karen responses if you come and you tell someone, well, they diagnose you with schizoaffective bipolar disorder with manic episodes. It's a whole different look. And depending on generation, their knowledge, their understanding, now they may think you're crazy or they may think they're going to judge you negatively. So it makes it hard to really go in and come out with this language. So it's a source of friction for people in therapy. And then the last portion I think that makes it hard is therapy. When people say it feels clinical, I feel like it comes to the language and then what I would call kind of like a sanitized room. When we'll tell our friends, social media, some people put it all on TikTok, everything about us that's going on wrong. But I feel like when people do that, it's like being in a dirty environment and you're tracking dirt, but this environment already, got dirt. You just watch right before you made this post, someone who robbed a bank and, decided to steal food from a homeless person. So it's like, well, my stuff isn't that bad. So it's like you kind of already adding dirt to a dirty area. You don't really notice. But when it comes to therapy, it's different because a therapist can't bring their issues into the therapy session because it's unprofessional. So you're walking into a room that's completely clean. There's no dirt. It's just completely clean. And you're tracking all this mess in. And that makes you, or make most people feel self-conscious. Because then you're looking back at, man, I'm bringing in all this bad stuff. And how is this therapist going to look at me or judge me? Because now we're applying societal rules to this environment. and you start doing what you don't really think about it probably, but you start cleaning things up. You're like, okay, well, I came to therapy because I got anger issues and I like to punch people for it or something or yell at people. But I know that's bad to do. So I don't want to tell the therapist, well, right before I got here, I punched like 4 people on the way in because I was mad. Maybe I'll say I punched 3. 3 is really not an acceptable number either. So, okay, maybe I'll say I just yelled at them. That seems better. Well, yelling could be bad. So I yelled at them in my head or I envisioned punching them. Okay, that's acceptable because I didn't do any harm. So now you're talking to your therapist and you're like, well, they made me angry and I yelled at them in my head, but I didn't hit anybody. But now you're actually working on the wrong issue. You're not working on what's actually the problem. You're created this sanitizer, this cleaner problem to work through. And you and the therapist now will spend however many hours until they figure out that this problem is deeper and worse than what it is. And you spent maybe months in therapy. You're angry because you feel like you're not improving and it's not working, but you've never even started really working on the problem. So I feel like, these are kind of things when it comes to therapy, and talking to a therapist is not the only type of therapy. So I don't want people to feel that way. But if you're going to try talking to a therapist, but these are things that I would like for people to keep in mind, not every therapist works for you. And, there is a language friction. And then the other portion would be, don't clean up your mess because they need to know it in order to help you truly clean it up and work through it.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, the first time I went looking for a therapist, she's like, okay, I highly recommend you go on 3 first dates with 3 different therapists. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, you have to interview them. You have to make sure that there's like a connection, right? There's chemistry, so that then you're feeling more open to share that, like the full unsanitized version. Feel like you can show up fully yourself. And like exactly like you said, there's like a million different modalities that maybe is completely wrong for where you are. Maybe in the future it will be perfect, but we're all starting at different levels of how open we are, how deep you want to get right from the start. It's like, okay, sometimes you have to peel the couple layers off the top before you're like, okay, let's go down to the center. So it is very, very important. And it's hard, right? Because like I worked with several therapists without ever once bringing up my sexual trauma. Not once. Because until my meditation teacher finally was like, do you think you might be ready to work on that? And I was like, oh, I guess. Like, do I have to?
Exactly.
Like, it's fine, right? It's totally fine. I'm like, ugh, I suppose. It's like, and it took me like 4 years of like talking to therapists before I was like willing to actually be open about the thing that was happening underneath. And sometimes it takes time, but
yeah.
But it's helpful if, like you said, you go in ready to put all of that out there so they know what it is that you're like really trying to work.
Exactly. And they can help you kind of peel back those layers. It doesn't mean because you put it all out that they're going to be like, well, let's dive to the deepest end of the deepest, the worst portion of it. But it just lets them know how deep it is. So when you're talking to them on how you react and how you think, it's like, okay, this is stemming from something really deep, and we're taking it step by step, through it all.
Yeah, that's huge. So if people are curious about your transmedia universe, about all of your work, where would you like to point them?
The best place would be VaelorinVerse.com. And that's VaelorinVerse.com. And that's where you can find, the most up to date, the things that the folklores, the audio versions of it. You get the immersive portion, the memorial wall for those who've lost people and, want a place to honor them. If you can, even if you can't afford a tombstone, it's free. I'm not charging for any of this. That's where you would be able to find everything that you want. Even links to the shop is there. And then I'm on social media at @JVaelorin. So that's another place where you can find me and kind of see what I'm up to.
Beautiful. And we'll put everything in the show notes so people can copy and paste or click the links where that works. Doesn't work like that everywhere, unfortunately. But thank you so much, Justin, for being here, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing all these important pieces about being open to going to therapy, to these resources that are available to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Victoria. I deeply appreciate it.
I appreciate you. And thanks everybody who's listened. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please rate, subscribe, share with other people. And please go check out Justin and all of the magic that he is building. See you next time.